William Allister Burns slammed the door shut, threw down his wet umbrella in the corner of the hallway, and started to remove his wet overcoat as he examined the drawn and pale-looking face that stared back at him in the mirror. He had just been through another piss-awful day at the office and had arrived home late once again, feeling mentally drained and physically exhausted, and he was really looking forward to winding down a little before making himself a meal. His life at the moment was an endless cycle of early mornings, hot strong coffee, working 10-12-hour days, hot strong coffee, the packed train home, a bottle of wine, and finally, bed. It was during days like this that he questioned just what his life was all about. An introspective examination of his life revealed a sorry tale. He had no love interest. There was just no time for him to schedule it into his life at the moment. And he knew that he had finally reached the point where he was living to work as opposed to working to live. He had tried to console himself that this probably wasn't all that unusual for someone in his position. An out-of-town boy, away from the friends that he had grown up with, starting a new job in the big city and showing an early, ruthless streak in his determination to reach the top that had made him no friends. Yes, he was lonely, all right, but he didn't know what to do to break out of the self-imposed cycle that he had created. His subconscious was telling him that he just wasn't cut out to make it the way that he had been doing, but he refused to heed his own warnings. It was as if he was trying to prove something to himself, and as a result was becoming increasingly dysfunctional. At 28 years of age, he felt burnt out, and he had recently started to realize that somewhere along the way, he had really lost the plot. For the last 5 years, this had been the pattern of his life, and until recently, he had found nothing that could inspire him and would raise his spirits. That was until he had finally bought himself a PC and had gotten himself online. It was a rare thing to find in someone his age, but William was a novice when it came to anything to do with computers. He had recently bought himself a PC for home, a complete set which included a scanner, modem, and printer as part of the overall package. He didn't really have a clue what it was all about, but the adverts said it was plug and play, so that's what he did. It took him 2 days until he found the wonders of the web via a free introductory package from a well-known ISP. It would prove to be his salvation. His introduction to cyberspace was a revelation, and he was soon led towards the various sex sites that were hard to avoid. And by the end of his first week online, he had subscribed to a few membership-only sites in an attempt to satisfy his ever-growing sexual frustration. He had discovered a whole new world that was non-threatening and required no commitment from him, and was soon rewarding his right hand as he fantasized over the sites that were so brazenly spread out before him. By the time of his second week online, he had started to find that these increasingly repetitive pictures of females' genitals, exposed from every conceivable angle, could only keep your interest for so long before you craved for something more. And William was certainly craving. It was then that he attempted to look for something other than crude pictures, and tried to find something had a little more imagination to fuel his libido, that he stumbled across a site that immediately hooked him. He had been using one of the search browsers, Yahoo, to see what else was out there, and had been rewarded by a listing of erotic fiction sites when he saw an entry for a site called Fiction Mania. He was intrigued by the description, transgender/transformation stories containing graphic depictions of sex acts, bondage, domination, and body piercing. He had seen the term transgender used on various sex sites, but had never really understood what it had meant. Something to do with boys wanting to be girls or something. Still, it wouldn't hurt to give it a try. He clicked on the entry and was soon taken to a professional-looking homepage that contained a small picture and multiple choices. The first thing that struck him was the total lack of naked women on display, not even any with the obligatory masked genitals. There was just a cute picture of a little girl being admonished by a wickedly grinning woman, along with a caption claiming that the girl was her punished husband. Clicking on the picture brought up a whole selection of similar pictures, which were humorous and not at all pornographic. He could just feel that this experience was going to be different from what he had been used to, and he started to click on the presented options with an enthusiasm he hadn't felt for a long time. The hyperboard left him cold. He didn't know any of the individuals on it, and all it seemed to contain was a bunch of messages, and some woman, which he took to be the web mistress, moaning on about bandwidth problems and the like. Geez, he thought, get a life, some people. The random titles were fun. He couldn't believe how many of them were available. But some of the other items went completely over his head. That was until he finally clicked on the stories. He had started on the news stories first, finding a huge diversity and breadth of topics. He was intrigued. All of the tales dealt with various types of transformation, and all about men and boys being changed into women and girls. There were so many different tales, from cross-dressing to magical transformations, from forced to self-induced feminization, from body swaps to age regression. There seemed to be so many different ways that a boy could be changed to a girl, willingly or not. He soon found himself becoming lost as he looked through the last 7 days' entries, and before he knew it, he had been reading for 3 hours solid. Furthermore, from the ache in his groin, he realized that he had been rock hard for the whole of that time, and he knew that he needed to relieve himself. He did find this a little disturbing, having always considered himself solidly heterosexual, and wondering how he could find himself so excited by the author's fantasies of becoming female. But his manhood demanded release, and he decided to take a break and take the matter in hand, so to speak. A bare 10 minutes later, he was finished and feeling much more relaxed. The thoughts of what he had found were still strong in his mind, and he knew that he would be paying the site another visit before the evening was out. First, though, he decided to take a shower and freshen himself up a little. His eyes had become a little strained from staring at the screen in the office all day, and his latest 3-hour session on top of that meant that he needed something to wake him up. Besides, he hadn't eaten yet, and he had to maintain his strength, especially if he was in for a repeat session of what he had just been through. His meal had been functionary rather than a gastronomic delight. TV dinners tend to be that way, and as he finished, he looked up at the clock, noticing that it was now 10:55 p.m. He knew that he should really go to bed. He had an important meeting first thing in the morning, and he needed to be sharp and alert for it. But he just couldn't resist just one more spell on the www. He was still flushed with enthusiasm, and he wanted to see what the chat line was like. He had seen that option on the menu and had never been on one before. About 5 minutes later, he was sitting in his darkened room, eyes glued to the screen as he entered a nickname in response to the prompt. He hadn't had a clue what to enter at first, but for some reason he found himself reluctant to enter his real name, fearing that he would be mistaken for a pervert of some kind, and that this would be able to be tracked back to him. He had no idea of what sort of people he was going to meet here. He spent a few seconds before typing in Alistair, his middle name, thinking that this should be safe enough. A second later, he was welcomed by a screen that acknowledged his presence, and he then attempted his first communication with the innocuous message. He hadn't known what to expect, but was surprised to be met by a stony wall of virtual silence, and was left staring into the ether. He didn't know if he had done anything wrong, and was starting to assume that most people would not be available at the moment due to the time difference between the UK and the USA. He was thinking about going back to the main menu to look for some more of those stories when a response came out of the blue. For a brief moment, William was speechless, or he would have been if he had actually been talking to someone. As he wondered how to respond, he was not very good at interacting with people, and even though he could not be seen, he flushed with anxiety as he wondered what he should do. He decided to respond, and before he knew it, he was soon immersed in a dialogue with Cindy, giving out details about himself and his fantasies that he previously had not even admitted to himself, let alone to another person. It just seemed so easy to open up using this medium. It was totally non-threatening. For the next hour, he felt alive and in touch with the world for the first time. He tried to repeat this episode over the next few days, but found, to his growing frustration, that the time difference between the UK and the USA was, indeed, an inhibiting factor if he was ever going to extend his circle of virtual friends. On these occasions, he returned back to the extensive and ever-growing collection of stories that were revealing new facets of his own psyche to him. Although the stories were great, he was missing his new form of communication, and after another 2 nights, without managing to contact anyone, he decided to try to search for other chat lines when he next logged on. He decided to get some sleep and to try tomorrow. The next day, when he awoke, he found that it was a fine spring Saturday morning, and after completing some necessary chores, he settled down back to his terminal for another session online. He decided to try a new web browser and straight away found that he was presented with a whole plethora of other sites that ranged from the major hosts covering both generic and specific topics to very detailed focus groups. He found the big chat lines too chaotic and that they tended to be dominated by teenage boys with overactive sexual imaginations. Getting bored with these, he had resigned himself to just sporadic visits to his favorite Fiction Mania chat line and had gone back to browsing the sex sites again, searching for some new angles to satisfy his curiosity. The day that changed his life happened a week later when he went into Alta Vista and typed in teenage girls. He was rewarded with the usual thousands of entries boasting of perverted and obscene pictures, which he skipped over until finally, on the second listing, he noticed a new entry. Girls on Top, magazine for teenage girls. He wasn't quite sure why. Maybe his exposure to so much gender confusion and celebration via fiction mania was rubbing off on him. But something intrigued him, and he found him positioning the cursor and clicking on the URL before he was even aware of what he was doing. He was soon taken to a very professional-looking site, and a quick scan of the options showed an extensive coverage, all of the topics that he would have imagined a girl could be interested in. Tips on makeup, latest fashions, virtual makeovers. It was all there. Never having had much experience with girls, he found that everything was a complete new experience for him. From the way that girls discussed intimate topics with an openness he had never experienced as a man, to how the whole site was designed to boost a girl's self-esteem, taking a positive slant on everything, and the whole feeling of sisterhood that pervaded throughout. Is this really how girls and women feel and interact? He thought, wondering for the first time how different his life might have been had he been born a girl. He finally saw an option among the multitude of colors and animated images that had him hooked, and he moved the cursor immediately to that area. Free email and chat line. Press enter to continue. Which he promptly did. It was done more out of instinct rather than as a conscious act, and he started to get increasingly nervous as a new screen awaited him. It felt like someone was observing him and wondering what a grown man was doing in a domain for young girls. This new screen was asking him to fill in some details about himself. To get your free email and your chat line ID, please enter some details about yourself and enter the nickname you wish to be known by. He paused for a moment, wondering whether what he was contemplating was even legal. The trouble was, he knew he had to go further. He just had to see what this chat room was like, even if it meant making up a whole new persona for himself. He also knew that it would have to be that of a teenage girl if he was going to be able to pass into this area. The questions peered out the screen at him, demanding an answer, and he continued before he could think too much about what he was doing. Q1, sex, female. Q2, first name, Jennifer. Q3, last, name, Wells. Q4, age, 15. Q5, hair, brunette. Q6, height, 5'7". The questions continued, and he entered his name and address details until, on completion, he finally submitted the form. He had now created a whole new identity for himself, and as he checked the details, he realized he had modeled them on his next-door neighbor, Jenny. Once he had entered these basic details, he was rewarded by yet another screen. This one was asking for his hobbies and interests, his likes and dislikes, his favorite type of music, and whom he thought was his favorite hunk. He was nonplussed. How on earth was he going to find out these things? And he walked over to the window, hoping to draw some sort of divine inspiration from somewhere. He was lucky. Inspiration arrived in the form of Jenny, walking out into the garden to hang out some washing to dry. He had been aware of both Jenny and her family since he had moved here 2 years ago, 3 years after he had graduated. She had been a plain and skinny little 14-year-old girl then, obviously a late developer, and wouldn't have drawn a second look from anyone. He would never have imagined that she would have grown up into this nubile and perky 16-year-old heartbreaker since then. He looked at her as she hung out her lingerie, hand-washed, no doubt, and tried to imagine the type of things she might have liked, from clothes and outside interests to boyfriends. He knew that he had seen plenty of adolescent boys hanging around here, but couldn't really remember any of them. Just then, he had an idea. He could browse the site's pages and just see what the articles and topics covered. All he needed to do then would be to use his artistic license and embellish things a little. That would surely do. He forgot about Jenny for a moment as he opened up a new window, not wanting to lose the information that he had already entered. Just 10 minutes later, he had enough information to complete his entry, and returning to the details page, swiftly entered his new profile, his nickname, Jenny1954, and finally clicked on the submit button, feeling excited and slightly subversive at the clandestine nature of what he had done. Seconds later, he received confirmation of a new email account, jenny.wellsteengirl.com, and a chatline ID, which, after all that form filling, he was eager to use. He clicked on the chatline option, entered the password, clicked on yet another chatline option, and finally entered the room. His heart was beating wildly as he waited to see what was going to happen. He was greeted by the last couple of messages, and above that, the legend. Jenny1954 has entered the lobby. He looked across to the top right-hand corner of the screen and saw that there were 20 users in here right now. He was pretty impressed and surprised. Looking at his watch, he saw that it was only 3 p.m. That was 10 km EST. He hadn't expected much in the way of traffic until later. The screen was scrolling swiftly. Jesus, young girls can really talk. When he saw one of the messages asking for a stats check, he decided he would wait for a moment before plunging head-on in. He wanted to get the feel for the language and protocols of these teenage girls. He watched the screen continue to scroll. He noticed that the last message was highlighted in red and seemed to be addressed directly to him. Not being sure what to do, he positioned the cursor over the sexy girl logo and was rewarded with a hand icon. Clicking on it opened up a panel in which he quickly entered. Hi, yeah, I want to chat. What's the D mean? And pressed send. He soon got a confirmation of receipt and waited to see what happened next. As he waited, he watched, fascinated as the screen continued to scroll. There seemed to be none of the macho posturing he had encountered on most of the other chat lines. And although the occasional male dropped in, they were generally ignored, seeming to be tolerated, but treated as a minor irritant. Just then, he received another PM from Sexy Girl. He responded instantly, starting to enjoy the dialogue. CSF UK, just outside London. He was really getting into the imaginary persona of Jenny now, and casting his mind back to his neighbor, started to provide further details about his imaginary life. Okay, I'm about 5'5", got shoulder-length brown hair, and have an older brother called Samuel, who reminds me a little of Johnny Depp. You? And so it went on for the next 20 minutes or so until Sexy Girl had to leave to go shopping with her mom. The thing he found most amazing was how candid females were with each other. He couldn't believe some of what Sexy Girl had told him, especially about how envious she was of women with bigger breasts. William, or Jenny, hadn't helped when he had told her that he was fairly generously endowed, and he felt a little concerned when he wondered why he had told her that. Did he really want to be like Jenny? He could have carried on. There were plenty of other chatmates who were looking for somebody to talk to. But he felt a little overwhelmed at what he had done and wanted a little time to collect his thoughts. He couldn't believe that he had just passed himself off as a 16-year-old girl called Jenny and felt flushed with excitement at his success. He was back on the chat line again later that night, reasoning that there might be more girls joining in as the afternoon turned into evening. This turned out to be true, and there were some 40-plus girls, as well as the odd boy in the main lobby when he got through. He also found some other participants as he checked through some of the other rooms. Sexy Girl wasn't on this time, but he found plenty of others to chat to. He concentrated on imagining that he was the real Jenny next door, as he joined in the general chat and found that it helped him to take part in the many conversations much more naturally. It even managed to fool an oversexed teenage boy that had PM'd him, and William stopped quickly and logged off when he realized that he had been flirting with him. What on earth was he getting himself into here, he thought. William's little piece of escapism soon became an everyday occurrence, and indeed had started to settle into a routine. He had gotten into the pattern of returning from work, taking a shower, having a meal, and then going to his first bookmark, Fiction Mania. He always liked to catch up with the stories that appeared there, and found that they were staring to have an increasing relevance to him as his second priority visit. Logging on to the Girls on Top chat line and assuming the role of Jenny took a hold on his life. By the end of his second week in this persona, he had taken it far further than he had intended to and was having a ball. He now found that his previous reason for living, his job and career, was now taking second place to his fantasies. He had started leaving work earlier and earlier, wanting the most time that he could possibly get online. He had also reached a watershed during that second week, although he didn't realize it at the time. It happened one night when he was online as Jenny and talking to his regular friend, Sexy Girl. He had found it so easy to talk to her, finding that her questions gave him many leads and helped him to develop the character of Jenny, along with the increasingly more acute observations he was making of his next-door neighbor. They had gotten to the stage when they would agree what time to log on together so they could continue to meet in the cyber world, and this was now happening every other night. They had been chatting for about 20 minutes. Sexy Girl had revealed her real name as Sandra when Jenny got the PM. Jenny? William had started thinking of himself in these terms now when he was chatting and reading stories, flipped over to his email and checked his inbox. Sure enough, there was an email from Sandra, and opening it, he saw an attachment with an IPG suffix. He double-clicked and felt his anticipation rising as he saw the load bar grow. A few seconds later, he was presented with a picture of a very pretty girl, dressed in denim cutoffs and a short, skimpy top. She sported a huge, beaming smile, and who looked like she enjoyed life, being the very picture of what he would have imagined a young Texas girl would look like. The weirdest thing was that he didn't feel at all aroused. This was Sandra. This was his friend. He just couldn't relate to her as William. He felt very confused with his feelings, but changed back to the chat screen to see Sandra's message had now scrolled out of sight. He found Sexy Girl's name and clicked on it before slipping back into his Jenny persona and filled in her message in the panel provided. Hi, Sandra. Got your picture just fine. Gosh, you are so pretty. And your hair. I feel really jealous. Jenny soon received a response. Reality took over, and he was William again as his heart sunk to the floor. How was he going to get out of this one? He must have thought about this for too long, as he soon received a prompt from Sandra. He slipped back into Jenny mode and hit the reply button. Sorry, just looking for something. I haven't got a picture on my PC. I will try and get one for tomorrow. Will you be here? William was back and worried. Why had he promised to send something to her tomorrow? He didn't have any pictures of anyone who might fit the bill, unless... Next morning was a Saturday again. The sun was shining, and he was up early, setting off for the local shopping center. He had just the bare bones of a plan. It wasn't much, but at least it was something. He didn't want to let his new friend down. He didn't waste much time and was soon leaving the photographic shop, clutching his new digital camera. Part 1 completed. Now he just hoped that things would follow the script that was starting to unfold inside his head. This concludes part 1 of the story. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned and consider supporting us on Patreon or YouTube for early access to subsequent parts.